We have four amazing members of the panel discussion. Carole Cadwalladr, investigating reporter for The Guardian, one of the journalists who broke Cambridge Analytica story. Matthew Galizia, director for the Daphne Galizia Foundation in Malta. Primoz Cirman, investigative reporter from Slovenia. And the host of the discussion, Emilie van Outeren, Central Europe and Balkans correspondent from NRC Media. Emilie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much. It's an honor to be here with you today. I am calling in from Kiev today, so we are literally from all corners of Europe here at this panel. My panelists were already introduced, so let's not waste any time, and I'll start with the first question that I have for Carole. You were known for breaking the Cambridge Analytica scandal and uncovering Brexit campaign financing and manipulation. And I wonder when the people you wrote about first started retaliating against you.
Well, kind of almost immediately, actually. This has been going on. Sorry, there's a really bad echo on the line. I don't know if that's disturbing everybody else. But there's been. I started writing about Cambridge Analytica in February 2017, and we received the first of these lawsuits in May 2017. And the legal threats from Cambridge Analytica were directed at both The Guardian and at me. And so we were able to sort of fight back against those for an entire year before we published the sort of main bulk of our reporting. But this, the SLAPP suit, which is I've had against me for the last 2.5 years, that was separate to that. And the thing which makes it a SLAPP, certainly in my view, but also in the view of the freedom of expression organisations who have made statements, is the fact that it wasn't served against The Guardian or Observer, which is where all of my reporting was published, and it wasn't served against TED, which was where I made the talk that was complained of. It was just against me as an individual, and that suit was filed 2.5 years ago. I've lived with it for 2.5 years. I've just been through an absolutely grueling trial at the High Court in London. And it has, I have to say, had a very devastating effect on me, both personally and professionally. And I have huge sympathy to these many journalists who are suffering the same things. And I've been lucky enough to be able to crowdfund my legal defence, which is something that is not available to a lot of people. So in that sense, I've been very fortunate. But not having the support of a powerful institution to back and defend me has been completely debilitating.
Yeah, this is exactly what I think we need to discuss today, talk about here in this panel, is the personal consequences of this, because it's not just going after editorial rooms and going after big publications, but going after individuals. And Matthew, I think you can tell a little bit about how your mother, who basically was a trailblazer in Malta, working by herself, doing her blog and covering corruption, money laundering, and other crimes related to those in power on the island. And I hope that you can tell us a little bit about how she was hindered in her reporting before she was murdered in 2017.
Of course, the by herself bit is important, and this is where my mother's story is very similar to Carole's, because the point of coordinated SLAPP action against a journalist is to isolate them and turn the legal fight against them into a kind of public spectacle, to not just ruin their lives, but also turn the ruining of their lives into a public spectacle for people's entertainment. And of course, it's not a fair fight. It's a bit like a Roman arena where you have gladiators fighting. That's what the slappers wanted to seem like, but it's more like a T-Rex against an ant. The fight is completely asymmetric. The politicians, government officials, and their associates in business who were coordinating this campaign of defamation lawsuits against my mother were all working together. So we had all their resources combined, millions upon millions of euros worth of legal action against a single journalist working on her own from home. And of course, this kind of coordinated legal action puts the fear of God into other journalists. They just don't want to get into the fight. They don't want to associate themselves with the journalist who is being slapped. They're afraid of what might be done to them, that the same thing might be done to them. So they're isolated even further. It's
yes,
just
and as
really...
you're saying, they are... There's a financial impact, the personal impact, the isolation, the public spectacle. And I wonder maybe, Primoz, you could add to that how that is in your case with a small publication in Slovenia. And I hear that you are the record holder of currently having 42 strategic litigations against you. How do you deal with that?
Hello to everyone. Thanks for the invitation and welcome from Slovenia, a country where the media freedom is rapidly deteriorating in recent years, especially under the current government of Mr. Janša that took power 2 years ago. Slovenia is in a good path to become a liberal democracy, and SLAPP is one method of pressure against journalism that was first used on our case, unfortunately. We became target of a SLAPP lawsuits 2 months after this government took power. We are currently, our country is at number 42. We are a small media of free journalists, so you can imagine this means a huge financial and psychological and economical burden in all ways for us. We know that basically there is a goal of these SLAPP suits to destroy our media. They were filed by a notorious tax advisor who claims himself to be advisor of Prime Minister himself, but holds no official title because of a story of his involvement into suspicious financing of ruling party through Bosnia and Herzegovina. We've been following this story now for 4 years, and since 2020, the lawsuits keep coming in. Unfortunately, these lawsuits, as Matthew said, are meant to be a public spectacle. They were followed by a smear campaign in pro-government media that in Slovenia are owned by a businessman from the circle of Viktor Orban, Hungarian Prime Minister, because you have to be aware of a very close connection between Orban and our Prime Minister Janša. So therefore, a smear campaign was very personal. Attacks were on a very personal level. So we try to fight that, and we know that there's a long way ahead of us.
And how do you deal with the intimidation? You're a small publication. You don't have an infinite number of resources. Slovenia is not a big country. How do you still manage to do your investigative journalistic work?
Well, basically, we got help from ECPMF, and we are very grateful for that. We have donations. We have a lot of people supporting us. We have our partners that are standing by our side. But of course, the burden is huge from financial level. The total cost will be in tens of thousands of euros, which is enormous amount of money for our media, which is, as I said, very small and niche. You can imagine this would be a huge cost for Slovenia, for any media in Slovenia, which is a country of 2 million people, and media market is very small. But I think that still the hardest part of this is psychological, because with the smear campaign that is following these lawsuits, they're basically trying to seed a doubt into the brains of your friends, your family. They see everyday articles about you that are totally made up, that are based on some motives that you have, that some people that are cooperating with you, that you're part of some kind of deep state, that you're waging a war against government, that you are an agent of some former communist regime or things like that. I mean, this list of claims against journalists is virtually went nuts in Slovenia in last year. And we know we have to live with it, but it's very hard because, as I said, Slovenia is a small country and everybody knows everyone. So it's the same. It's as it was on Malta. It's very hard to deal with.
Yeah, I would like to hear from Matthew on this also, because obviously your mother suffered the ultimate consequence of the state and its cronies campaign against her. But how has this resulted in, what has the effect been on media freedom in Malta in general? Because you and your brothers are following in your mother's footsteps, but is anybody still doing the corruption investigations that she was doing, or are people just too afraid?
I think that the long-term effect is that people are too afraid. People don't want to spend their entire lives suffering for the profession that they have chosen to do. They just want to do their job in a good way, without having to pay this price the entire time. And I think that forces people out of journalism. It's either that or kind of having your life ruined. So it's incompatible with democracy, incompatible with the ideals of the European Union. This system is simply indefensible. The most common attack that we get is, you want journalists to be protected from everything. No, we want to have conditions that allow us to do our job properly. Anything else is simply incompatible with the ideals of European democracy.
Yes, because as you're saying, and all three of you are examples of this happening in countries with a shorter or longer tradition as liberal democracies with freedom of the press, where you cannot officially be censored, but the SLAPP is a different way to try and basically shut you up. Carole, maybe you can talk a little bit about this, a country with an enormous history, and how this is affecting your work and that of others. How much time can you still spend on your actual investigations, and how draining is this claim against you?
Well, basically, I've had to reorganise my entire professional life because of this suit. And I think that the thing which is still really poorly understood and is really poorly understood by media organisations is that the lawsuit is just one aspect of it. And what it does is that, I think in my case, what happened is because I became the target of very sort of coordinated, systemised online abuse. And this creates a kind of culture of permission, in a sense. I become a target, a sort of cultural hate figure. And then that paves the way to other actions, such as this suit against me is seen as somehow illegitimate because I was controversial. I kind of went too far. And that's the sort of perception that is created. It makes me a legitimate target. And then every aspect of the lawsuit then becomes an object which is used to drive more online targeting. So every single step of the way in my lawsuit has seen a sort of tsunami of attendant articles in this sort of right-wing and disinfo press. And every single one of those articles then contributes to a new narratives, a new online pile-on. And so it's been this sort of perfect circle of which there's no escape. And one of the things which my experience of it is that you simply cannot advocate for yourself. So because it just seems like, oh, she's whining on again, she should have been more careful. It's all, this thing of the individual is totally trapped. And that's where having advocates out who can stand outside is so important. And that's why the statements by the media freedom organisations such as Reporters Sans Frontières, Index on Censorship and the others have been so sort of critical for me, because it legitimises the fact that this is happening and draws attention to it in a way that I cannot. And I see this, it's why I think this sort of international network, which is something that you're doing here, is so important. Because one of the other aspects of it is that, as Matthew said so clearly, is that it's meant to isolate, and it does. And that sort of feeling of lack of journalistic solidarity within one's own country is one of the most painful aspects of it. So, in fact, because, as Matthew said so clearly, it makes it all about you, the reporter, and not about the subject of your investigation, which is where the focus is supposed to be. So in terms of my particular sort of circumstance, which is there is an individual of which there's been huge amounts of reporting, not just about me, of these vital, like, public interest questions. But the focus isn't on him and those questions. Instead, it becomes about me in this trial. And then that's not even covered by the rest of the press because of this sort of faulty perception. So the whole thing is, you know, it's a very complex, it's a sort of very complex system, as I said, of sort of like of information distortion and management. But
yes, and this intimidation on so many levels, from the court to your social media to fake news outlets that report on you. But does it also affect your reporting? Does it make it more difficult? Sure. Good. I just wondered if it made your reporting more difficult because people now think that you are somebody you're not.
I can't report in the way that I used to because I was made into a controversial figure. And that's been the sort of effect of the online targeting. And also, you know, my time has been so taken up by this lawsuit. But the other thing I'd like to say is that, as you were saying, is that this thing of that it's not just that your friends and family and strangers and whatever start to believe it, but you also start to believe it too, because it is intimidating. You do internalize much of this criticism. And that's been, you know, that's one of the sort of like most pernicious impacts of it, because as Matthew said, it's intended to isolate, and it does isolate. And I think that's the sort of psychological consequences of that are, you know, just, you know, profound, actually.
Yeah, it sounds paralyzing. Like it paralyzes the work that you do and the life that you live as an observer, an investigator, and a writer, rather than a public figure that you are made into by these claims. And maybe, Primoz, maybe you can tell a little bit more about how all these SLAPPs are usually driven by private people who sue journalists, but there are strong connections with government figures and the governments that we should rely on to defend democracy and the free press. How does this work in Slovenia?
This guy who sues us, he's basically a top crony in the ruling party. He's a top financial and tax advisor. He provides money for the party, and our story is in huge public interest. It is suspicious flows of money from Bosnia and Herzegovina through some proxies connected to this guy to Slovenia. This is the amount of money that can basically decide election in Slovenia, because €500,000 is a large sum for politics in Slovenia for any party. But I would like to refer what Carole said. The goal is one, and that is to kill a story. And they made it. Why? Because they scared other journalists who initially followed the story, and now they stopped it. So what is the worst thing the journalist can get is that he becomes a story himself. So basically, in an absurd situation, no one is talking about suspicious flows of money from Bosnia and Herzegovina that is maybe connected to criminal activities to Slovenian politics, but now story is our media. We are pursued as enemies. They say that it's personal. So it's basically everything is wrong here. And of course, you cannot do other reporting because you're not even invited to any press conferences. They claim you're controversial, and in the end, they say that you have that you are the criminal. They want to criminalize you. So we are talking about criminals that want to criminalize the journalism, and that is something that is huge problem in transitional countries. Now it's coming to Slovenia, and my message and our message is: we cannot win this battle alone. We have to fight this. We have to tackle this dragon on European level.
Yeah, that's very important. Matthew, maybe you can add to that, because your mother's death did lead to a lot of attention on Malta and everything that was wrong there on so many levels of corruption. Have things changed in the past years? Are you less of a target than she was, or are we seeing the same activities from the government and its cronies?
No one has yet been brought to justice for my mother's key investigations. So until that happens, there is not going to be a deterrent. Yes, we do need protections from SLAPPs in order to do our journalism. But remember that SLAPPs are part of a complex within the world of corruption. And that it is fundamentally that which is enabling the kind of people who take this targeted legal action against us. So until there is a deterrent to that corrupt criminal activity, and until our authorities focus on stopping corruption, on putting organized criminals in jail, instead of going after us as journalists or going after people like my mother, the situation is going to persist. So we need these protections against SLAPPs, but fundamentally, we need there to be a deterrent to corruption. And that is what is missing in Malta.
Yeah, until this day, that has not improved, and those people can walk free and even go after you and your family still. Carole, what is the role of politics in your case? Because your reporting is very much connected to the Brexit campaign and all the misinformation around that and the flow of money. But there are calls in the UK for better protection and assistance of journalists dealing with these lawsuits. Do you see any improvement? Do you see any protection for whoever's next?
No, I mean, the only thing I'd say is that there was a parliamentary debate a few weeks ago it was bipartisan, so there was sponsored by a Conservative and a Labour MP around the subject of SLAPPs and the need to reform. But in the meantime, we just see it escalating. You know, there was this extraordinary case of Catherine Belton, who's an investigative journalist, who I think it was 6 Russian oligarchs and Russian state-owned firms came after her publisher and she was, you know, in a sense, she was fortunate she had a publisher who was prepared to defend it and pay for it, and that's important. But of course, that also has a chilling effect on other publishers approaching these kinds of stories. So and the thing I think you can see is that there's a contagion effect. So, you know, that's one of the things which makes my particular case sort of a potential landmark in terms of the legal aspects of it is because this is the first time since we had a reform of our libel laws, and what happened is a public interest defence was introduced, and that was based upon the European Convention of Human Rights, the right of freedom of expression. And so we now have those laws, but the question is, do they work? And this is the first time a journalist has gone to trial and has used the public interest defence. And so there's a real question here. If I, you know, and in my case, I brought 2.5 years worth of investigative reporting, went behind me saying these 23 words. I'm being sued over 23 words, which had previously been published in The Guardian. And I included them in a talk, a TED talk, which is a massive, you know, global, North American-owned platform. And so if a journalist cannot do that, if a journalist cannot speak about the story, which has already been previously published and was not sued about, and they cannot speak freely in any way about their reporting, and then we're in a really, really bad state. And that's whereby sort of, you know, mine is that if I win, then at least we know that there is this public interest defence for our reporting. If I lose, then that has a chilling effect, not just on reporting investigation into this figure, but into all figures across Britain. So I think we're in a really, really dark place. And that's where actually the lack of sort of solidarity from the rest of the press in Britain for this case is like one of the most self-defeating aspects of it, because we're all going to suffer. All media organisations and journalists are going to suffer if I do actually lose this.
Yeah, you describe it as almost like a virus, that you become something contagious that other journalists no longer want to touch or sources no longer want to engage with. And the law is not enough of an immune system. It's not enough of we're not vaccinated enough, even as liberal democracies, to protect against this.
But also as well, so can I just explain as well? So in Britain, you know, the most, this person has spent £1 million on this case so far. He's spent £1 million to try and silence me. And if he wins, he is going to win damages of £20,000. So it's clearly not about the damages. And there is clearly, you know, as Matthew said said so articulately, this is asymmetric. The idea that I, as an individual, I've had to crowdfund almost £1 million to fight this case. And but it really makes you, I think one of the effects for me has made me realise that this, how determined this individual has been, the lengths he's gone to shut down this reporting. And that, as I said, is why if it's successful, I think it's really, really, chilling for the rest of us.
Very scary. Yes, Primoz, you wanted to add something to that. Please go ahead.
Yes, I want to raise stakes of what Carole said. In our case, it's the opposite. Mr. Snežić filed 42 lawsuits, and he refuses to pay 5,000 euros of court taxes. I repeat, 5,000 euros. So this case is now for 6 months on hold because he wants to persuade the court that he doesn't have 5,000 euros to pay these court taxes. Of course, he owns 2 Lamborghini cars. He owns around 13 properties that are officially owned by some shell companies or proxy owners. He has jumbos at highways in Slovenia where he invites businessmen from Slovenia to go to Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is an offshore country and tax haven. So it's basically bizarre that our court still allows playing with only with our careers and profession, but with our lives like that.
Prolonging this just endlessly, it seems.
Yes, and that's the goal, to kill the story and to kill the media.
Yeah. Okay, Matthew, maybe you can have a final word for us about how we can all combat this together in solidarity as journalists internationally here together today.
Yes, just let's remember that the right to free expression exists for speech that is offensive, abhorrent. We are talking here about not even that. We're talking about normal journalistic work. So if not even that is protected, then what hope is there for any other kind of speech? We need these really basic protections for what is basic journalistic work. And until that comes true, then yes, we need journalists to stand in solidarity with each other. My family got that after my mother's murder. NGOs came forward, the same as in Carole's case, offered their support. We were able to fight back against the libel suits that we had inherited from my mother. This kind of solidarity and support is really important. We need to rally more of it. But of course, we also need institutional support and we need legal changes across the European Union.
Yes, well, let's all continue to report and write about that, as well as all the incredible investigations that you're doing nationally to inform your audiences before a Slovenian election coming up, trying to combat corruption on Malta, and still dealing with all the effects of the Brexit for you, Carole, as well as as what this has done to your personal lives. I want to thank you so very, very much for your engagement today.